I'm Dr. Ellen Fitzpatrick. I'm the Director of International Programs. And today we have a special treat. We're hearing from 4 of our students who have just returned in the last month or so from their field work abroad. Each year, students are asked to design and conduct a graduate-level field project outside the United States. For many students, this is their first time abroad. They have gained field experience working in a new environment and adjusted to different cultural norms. They undergo intense preparation before they leave the Clinton School with regards to social science field techniques, culture, politics, and yes, health. Perhaps most of them have learned how to be flexible, adapt to different rules of the game, and to do it with grace. Most have grown in ways that will serve them well both personally and in their careers. So today I'd like to introduce you to Brandon Matthews, Tatiana Riddle, Tracy Johnson, and Julian Kelly. They're going to talk a little bit. I've asked them to talk for 2 or 3 minutes to describe their international experience, and then I have some specific questions to ask them. So if you could start, Julian, and talk about your international project in just a few minutes.
Hello, and thank you. First and foremost, I just want to thank you all for coming out today. As Dr. Fitzpatrick said, my name is Julian Kelly. I am a second-year student here, and I traveled to Nairobi, Kenya for the summer. I worked with an organization called the Legal Researchers Foundation Trust, and what we did is that we wanted to raise civic awareness among the citizens of Kenya to try to help them to become more politically involved. And so we did some research on the rights that they have as political participants, and we developed a handbook to inform them of those rights and also to provide them with methods that they could use to actually become more involved within their government and political processes. As Dr. Fitzpatrick mentioned as well, that was my first time going, traveling internationally. It was a wonderful experience. I look forward to sharing that more in depth with you as the program goes on today.
Hi, I'm Tracy Johnson, and I went to Dhaka, Bangladesh this summer with Habitat for Humanity. My project was originally to develop an advocacy program, and as the project went on, it became more about providing recommendations for the organization. Advocacy was a new step at this organization for Habitat. There's different parts of the world are doing advocacy, but in Bangladesh it was their first step at it. So my project really went looking over what other Habitat organizations are doing around the world in terms of advocacy, and then providing specific recommendations for Habitat Bangladesh.
Hello, my name is Tatiana Riddle. I was in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, which is on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, the northernmost province. I worked with a group called the Aceh Climate Change Initiative, and they're a fairly new organization, and they are trying to engage legislators on environmental conservation issues in Banda Aceh. So what I did was I provided some basic kind of program support for them. I developed an English language brochure, a lessons learned document, and a few other little deliverables. So.
And my name is Brandon Matthews. I had the opportunity to travel to Can Tho, Vietnam, which is about 2 to 3 hours southwest of Ho Chi Minh City. And so I worked with Can Tho University. It's the largest university there in the Mekong Delta, and also with the organization Peace Work on a project that had me working with community members assessing their perceptions of health in the region, specifically Hua An, it's the hamlet I worked in, and then also working with healthcare professionals at the health clinic, the district hospital, and the district health center, looking at how they provide services and the system they use to evaluate that. So it was a really great experience.
Thank you. Tatiana, what was your biggest fear before you left the United States?
Probably my biggest fear that I had, or it was more of an apprehension. I had never traveled to Asia or Africa before, so this was my first time to Asia, and I think I was just a bit nervous about knowing that I wouldn't know the language. It was a completely different atmosphere there. Banda Aceh or Aceh province is the most conservative Muslim province in Indonesia, so I wore a headscarf, and so it was just being in a totally different environment. I think I was a bit nervous about, but it was really nice.
Okay, thank you. Julian, what do you think what was your biggest fear before you left? I think I know, but go ahead and share.
Honestly, my biggest fear was just being away from my family, my girlfriend, just the loved ones that I have for such a long time. Again, that was the first time that I'd ever been outside of the country, and to be away from those type of relationships for 11 weeks, I just knew it was going to be a difficult experience. But say within about the first 3 weeks, I really adjusted to the opportunity that I was in with Nairobi, and so I was able to really overcome that original fear that I had before leaving for Kenya.
And we kept a good eye on Julian because being in Nairobi after the violence that had occurred several months ahead of time, we wanted to make sure that he was safe and felt safe. So we're glad you were.
Oh, she did a very good job, by the way. Just wanted to go there.
Okay. Brandon, what was your most significant challenge, either personally or professionally? And how were you pressed mentally and emotionally by this experience?
So I think the biggest challenge for me was trying to understand the Vietnamese language. I have no language skills. I walked away with a few, but in a professional setting, I had to work with the community members, interviewing households and health staff, and there was that barrier, so we weren't able to communicate directly. So having to rely on the staff that I was working with to translate everything sometimes proved to be very difficult. Access to information, all the documents were in Vietnamese. So again, I had to rely on the staff to translate those, and really they did a tremendous job making sure that I could access those materials related to the health system there and how things work. But communication was probably the most challenging thing, and at times it frustrated me, especially in my personal life, just for simple things like getting around the city that I was in, ordering food, and trying to get the accent right. For those of you who don't know, there are 5 different accents in the Vietnamese language. It makes it extremely difficult to order food, and especially for somebody who can't understand or hear the difference in that, like the difference in ga or ga, which is fish or tomato. And often or not, I would end up ordering soup with tomatoes when I really wanted soup with fish. So that proved to be quite difficult at times.
And knowing the language is really important because there are many kinds of meats in that area of Vietnam. So I know just recently I thought I was eating chicken and it was rice-fed rat. So you just want to have a sense of what it is you're saying and eating. Okay, Tracy, would you answer that same question? What was your most significant challenge, personally or professionally?
My most significant challenge was probably with my project scope. In going into it, we knew it was going to be a very large project, but trying to figure out advocacy needs to be based on the community needs and what they want. And I'm not from Bangladesh, as Brandon said. I don't speak the language either, and I still don't know any of the language. But Habitat was really great about helping me with that, but still trying to read government policies in a country that the government is not super clear on what their policies are. They don't usually even have policies on a lot of the issues you're trying to address. So trying to find that direction that I could go while I was there in 10 weeks. Really what I ended up doing was just giving recommendations and trying to give a direction and talking a lot with my supervisor about what they could do once I wasn't there and once they had more resources, because I couldn't do it all, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to ask you all, what are you the most proud of? What was your greatest accomplishment, either personally or professionally? Julian, you want to start us out?
I want to say my greatest personal accomplishment. Honestly, it was the project itself, I want to say. Particularly because over the course of my entire project, I feel like there was a time where the coworkers that I was with and that I started off the project with, because we were working with organizations where they have different focuses or they have different goals and different responsibilities that we as students don't have. We're not necessarily interns, but at the same time, we're not actually in the same group or the same situation that the actual workers are. And so I say that because after a certain time, their focus really shifted to what they'd already been doing since I've been there. They were focusing on their job responsibilities versus really helping me, I guess, as much on the project that I was working on. And so to a certain point, it felt as if I was kind of on my own working on the project. And I feel like to be able to have really overcome that, because things definitely got difficult. You know, there were a lot of times where I felt as if I didn't have anyone that I could go to ask certain questions or to see what sources of research could I use. But I was able to overcome those, and I was very thankful for that. But looking back on that, it was an experience that I really learned from, just learning how to work on my own, how to overcome different challenges that I know I only experienced during my time there, but that I may experience future in my, as I go on in my career.
Thank you.
I'm going to take what I'm most proud about. Personally, I'm really proud that I went to Bangladesh. Before I went, everyone would say, do you know how busy of a city Dhaka is? It's a mega city, and it's one of the busiest cities, one of the most populated cities in the world. And so going there and not knowing what that really meant. I mean, I'm from Indiana. That was, I've been abroad, but never to a city like Dhaka. So I'm proud that I went there and that I was able to see a lot of the country with both Habitat and other organizations while I was there, and really introduce them to the Clinton School and who we are and our ideas, but also help to just learn about them as a country, because I never imagined going there before.
So did you feel adequately stretched?
Yes, but I felt adequately supported as well.
Oh, good.
Habitat and the Clinton School were both really great about preparing me for what we could prepare for, but also being like, you gotta be ready for what you're not gonna be able to prepare for, and it was fine.
Okay, thanks. Tatiana?
Yeah, I think in a similar way to Tracy and Julian, I'm most proud of the fact that I allowed myself to have a positive experience. IPSB is a lot of what you make of it, and there were many things that took me out of my comfort zone, such as wearing a headscarf and eating strange things, but I allowed myself to have a positive experience and really learn some lessons in flexibility and adaptability.
Brandon?
So I don't like crossing large bodies of water. That was probably the personal achievement. No. But professionally, there's one interaction I had that really stood out, and we were finishing up some late morning interviews, and we came to one of the last houses. I thought it was a house. Turns out it was a hut, but the woman had invited us in. She was on the list of people we were to survey, asking questions about, the perceptions of health clinic in the area, and her health, what she does to take care of her health, things like that. And the woman just couldn't believe that some outsider, let alone their own community, was listening to her. I mean, her story, she had been divorced at a younger age by her husband. She was operating like a snow cone shack for the children and just providing like candies and things like that. And she just couldn't believe that we cared about her health or we wanted to do something to make life different for her. So for me, that still stands out. I mean, her generosity and acceptance of us, but then just the fact that we were there doing something for her. So, I mean, I really got a lot out of my experience as far as like personal wealth and just the opportunity to help somebody else in a situation I never thought I could. So that's probably the greatest accomplishment that I had.
Thank you. And now we have Class 10 beginning to think about their international projects and talking with me and James Mitchell about where in the world they'd like to go and what kind of work they'd like to do. So what advice would you give to Class 10 as they begin to think about their projects? Brandon, you want to start us?
So for me, the destination was really important. This is potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to go somewhere I'd never been, to go outside of my comfort zone. And I chose Vietnam, and it was a wonderful experience. So I think when you're choosing where you want to go with this opportunity, think about where you want to go and know that the skills and the activities that you want to do, you're going to find those in many different places. So I think finding the environment you really want to challenge yourself, the environment you want to learn more about, the community, the culture, is something that should drive a lot of your decision making. It did for me, and I have no regrets about it.
I would say do as much research as you can before you leave on the culture of the area that you're going to be in. I was in Indonesia, which has the highest Muslim population in the world, during the month of Ramadan. And it was a fascinating cultural experience, but in terms of work, it really slowed down. We had a whole week at the end of Ramadan after it ended where nobody worked. So I think my advice to class 10 would just be to know what is going to be happening when you're there and to know different cultural nuances.
I agree with both of my classmates, but I would also, this goes with Brandon, but a little bit opposite of Brandon. Think of what you want to learn the most. I knew I wanted to go somewhere new, but I didn't really, the specific country wasn't important to me. It was more about why I was going to be doing. I knew I wanted to work on advocacy, and finding that project and being able to develop that, although it was a challenge, it really was a great experience and has helped me now in my capstone and my other goals. So really think about if it's about the place or it's about the project. Try to figure out which one it is about and really focus on that and go all in as much as you can.
I really want to touch on an idea that Tatiana mentioned earlier, just truly grasping the idea and the concept that you're going to make this experience as you make it. There are going to be situations that may occur that you didn't expect moving forward. You may have really had a lot of conversations with your project supervisor, and you kind of sort of build these expectations, but once you get there, something may happen in your living experience or living situation. Something may happen with a certain person that you're working with. So just understand and grasp the concept that this is going to be, a lot of this is going to be in your hands. A lot of the control that you will have over the project will be on you. And so do the absolute best in your preparation and really evolving and really expanding your expectation level. And just recognizing that this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's going to be very important, but a lot is going to be on your own shoulders. And just to really be aware of that and just really grasp that.
I think that that's a really good ending thought that you leave students with. And that is that we'll spend a lot of time next semester preparing for your project, researching the country you're going to, really thinking deeply about the social science techniques that you need to accomplish your project. But you can get to the country and then have things radically shift. So many students over the years have reported that what's really important in your training and in this experience is learning how to be flexible, learning how to adapt. It's challenging when you set up lots of meetings and nobody shows up. Or you say, let's meet at 2 and they show up at 4. And so you have this opportunity to either get mad and irritated or to handle it with grace and really gain the respect and admiration of your colleagues. And as you are able to do that, to yield with grace, it bodes well for both the Clinton School and for you as American citizens, as a representative of the United States. So I really encourage you to keep that little nugget in the back of your head when you're frustrated in your new environments. Are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask the students?
My name is Darla Embry, and I'm from Windrock International, and I'm interested in tapping into resources. How did you have a specific terms of reference or scope of work and go to partners to work on your projects, or did they approach you? And what was the length of time you were all in country?
So I actually had the opportunity to work with partner. Peacework was the point of contact, and I worked with Jessie Rice here. She helped me set up my project through the Clinton School. So a lot of the scoping was already decided for me that I was going to the work. So working with the physicians, the health clinic, the district health center, and interviewing households and community members, that was all kind of decided. As far as deciding how many and you know where to start and which hamlets to go to, all of that we still had to work out. But I pretty much had a good idea what the project was towards the end of my first semester, a little after now, I'd say mid-November. So I pretty much decided I wanted to go to Vietnam, and the opportunity came that there was a project there, and it was related to a topic that I was interested in, so I took that opportunity. I was in the country for 10 weeks, which was a little shorter than some of my colleagues, getting married before, or soon to come back, so had to get back soon for that. But if I could have stayed longer, I would have definitely.
Tatiana, you had a little different experience, yeah?
Yeah, my project was arranged by the Clinton School, but mostly with I had the benefit of having a Class 2 Clinton School alum, an Indonesian young woman in country. So she helped me a lot with setting up my project, and then I ended up working with the organization. And Banda Aceh is not very big, so it wasn't very hard to find. But it was a Clinton School arranged project. And then in the second semester, we developed work plans. So we have every week laid out before we go. It's bound to change, but we do make that plan before.
Anybody else comments? No? Okay.
I also went through a partner project with the school. This was Habitat's first time having someone in Bangladesh, and my supervisor was hired the week before me, before I arrived in Bangladesh. That's because advocacy is a new project for Habitat. So that was a challenge, so we didn't really talk that much in advance. I prepared as much as I could, but once we got there, we really had to figure out what we were going to do. And he had worked for Habitat before and had a lot of connections in the nonprofit community, so it was not a problem. And I was in country for right about 11 weeks.
So in working with the LRF, there have been two prior students who'd worked with them from the Clinton School. I was able to talk with one of them, just somewhat briefly, just to kind of get a good feel for what I'd be doing, or excuse me, who I'd be working with once I got to LRF. But a lot of the project planning was set up with the project supervisor, who was the program director of LRF, and I also did some communication with the CEO. And so primarily as the project went on and developed, it was the CEO who really became my primary point of contact. But as Tatiana and Tracy said, a lot of things were already set up. Again, during the second semester, we go through a work plan. We go through which we'll be doing certain projects or certain work plans throughout the entire project or whatnot. So it's kind of set up accordingly once we actually get there. But again, things definitely can change.
Fascinating experience, I have no doubt. Can you give me just a brief summary of what you think the impact of your project, the actual thing you were doing, or the product of that project was?
So the work that I did was a lot of the foundational work for this new rural village model that they've designed for the Mekong Delta to increase development. There's 19 different initiatives like health, education, economic, there's all kinds of fields, but mine was specifically related to health. And so what didn't exist at the time was kind of a basis of what people thought of the healthcare in the area. Specifically, Hua Anh, it was one of the poorest communes in the Mekong Delta. And so they tend to fall behind on the standards. For example, 70% of residents are supposed to have some form of health insurance. That's been met by the Mekong Delta on an average. But when you look at Hua Anh, only about 52% of the population have access to health insurance, whether it's provided by the government or through their job or some other form. And so then there's also the method they use to evaluate the services at the local level, so in the commune, the health clinic, at the district level, and then eventually at the provincial level. And so that system was kind of unregulated, or there were systems and guidelines put in place, but they weren't always kept. The records I found were outdated and semi-regular, so it was difficult to see like a standardized improvement or decrease in the amount of quality work. So a lot of what I did was the foundation for somebody else to move in and start tackling some of those challenges, like keeping up with the records or noticing what's wrong with the facilities. Is there something they can add, some kind of service, or the way they're accessing the community and getting information out?
I think the biggest impact of my project was probably bettering their communication and outreach, because they only started in November 2013. And I was working, it's a fairly small organization, my supervisor and then 3 or 4 young people working there. The young people working there spoke no English, and my supervisor was fairly proficient, but not completely fluent. So, and in their work, they wanted to get other partners that were outside of Indonesia. So, like, we had meetings with the Australia Zoo, with the European Union, and that by having communication materials that were in English that I helped to develop, it was easier to communicate with other potential partners.
I would say that I primarily gave them a good recommendation and outline or direction to go into. When we started, I mean, Bangladesh has so many ways that you could advocate. There's so many issues throughout the country, and there's so many people that you could do advocacy forever. And so I think trying to calm them down and say, let's really focus on what we can do as an organization, what you can do strategically and like feasibility wise. And so, and giving them that support, because they had so many ideas, and really just saying, slow down, let's make sure we know what the numbers are. I mean, you can't find a good population on DACA because there's so many people moving around. So just trying to find statistics and those things before we really start to go to the government and say, we want help, we need to know the basic stuff first. So I was really trying to bring them back a little bit and give them a direction to go into.
I want to say the primary value of the project was really somewhat establishing networks among different organizations that are within Nairobi in particular. We were able to meet with some of the human rights organizations. We were able to meet with some of the government and legal leaders within the Nairobi community. I'm not exactly sure if LRF had never met with some of those organizations or individuals, but being able to really involve them in the research and in the development of the project, I think not only benefited LRF, but also the organizations that we worked with as well. They were very interested in the future of the project. They were really wanting to know how things went throughout the entire project and beyond. And so I definitely think some of the networks that could have been established and the interactions that we had with those different organizations, I think were definitely beneficial to the project and to LRF overall.
Hello, I'm Becky, class 10. So we're thinking about all this. I just have a logistical kind of question, logistics question about computer and internet access and that kind of thing, because a lot of you were in sort of remote places, and along with doing the project, you have to have, you know, something written up and a planning paper and then something at the end, and I'm wondering how that worked for you, and if you could talk about if you did have some obstacles and getting it all done on the deadline. And
so working in Nairobi, which is a major city in Kenya, you know, fairly urban, I was blessed with the opportunity to have direct internet access, particularly where I work. Now, going back to the living situation, I think that was just more of a personal choice by the host. She didn't have internet access, so, you know, going home, I wasn't able to do a lot of work once I got there, but I never had, unlike certain students, you know, who unfortunately didn't have it, I was very blessed with the opportunity to actually have it at the workspace that I was working in.
I'm a bad example. I also had wonderful internet access. I lived right beside the organization. I was even able to connect to it when I was at my apartment. The internet stayed on even when the power was out. So, I mean, you didn't have air conditioning, but you'd have internet. I did have issues with internet when I traveled with them for a week. I didn't have any internet access, and that was a challenge that I didn't prepare properly for. I probably should have emailed some people saying I'm not going to be in touch, or I should have asked that question. So I would prepare to do that, but I had internet the whole time other than that.
My office was on the campus of a university in Banda Aceh, so we had great internet access in our office. On the side of where I was living, I lived with a retired professor, and he did not have internet access, so the Indonesians are fairly technologically connected, so they have all kinds of different devices. So I used a modem, an external modem, when I was home, but it was fine.
There's internet everywhere in Vietnam. But part of that is, so in the village I worked in, not so much. There were about 20,000 people spread out over like over 100 square miles. It was a large piece of land. But I lived in a city with 1.5 million people. So every other street corner there was a cafe with internet Wi-Fi. The hotel I stayed in was supposed to have Wi-Fi and didn't for like the first 6 weeks. There were problems. So I actually had to go to the College of Rural Development, is where I did most of my work in the village, and they had internet access there. Otherwise, accessing it traveling wasn't so much when I was out in the field. So I was pretty limited on what I could do unless it was late in the evening and I was back home, or it was early in the morning and I was still in the office. But for the most part, communication was pretty easy since I was with the staff I was with constantly. Communicating back home, 12-hour difference in the time zone made that difference. So just being aware that you might stay up till 10, 11 o'clock at night to send that email update to the people back home that you're also working with.
We had a group of four students that were in Uganda, in the northern part of Uganda. And this was a school that receives a large donation from Forrest Whitaker, the movie actor, Last King of Scotland. And so while I was visiting the students there, and the students were there, as the time that he was coming to campus approached, internet access just increased. And then he came with some folks from Ericsson who wanted to use their donations to the school as a PR campaign. Internet access was amazing. You know, you could see mice scurrying around in front of you, but you had great internet access. And then weeks after Forrest Whitaker left, you could see the internet capabilities diminish. In many places, especially when you're off the grid, you can get internet access that's solar powered. So it depends on whether it's the rainy season or the dry season, what kind of internet access you get. But it's a far cry from writing aerograms home once a week. Most of you probably don't even know what those are. The sheet of paper that you write on and then fold and mail, so you get cheap stamps. Other questions, concerns, interests?
I'm Carol Gaddis with the University of Arkansas Honors College in Fayetteville. And I'm curious that as students, there must be some kind of assessment that goes on after you get back that assesses how well you've done, what kind of grades you're going to get if you're graded. What kind of assessment is there, and what are your deliverables?
So sometimes projects don't always work out. You don't always get to the end goal that you set up months in advance. And so we're not graded per se on whether or not you met that goal or you failed to deliver that, but it's the work that you've done through it. There's a series of things. We have updates that we have to send. There are two main papers during the extent. There's a midterm report and a end-of-term report that you do that describes the work you've done. We've got a work log that we submit that shows, detailed what we've done day to day, the activities, who was involved. And so there's a pretty constant monitoring of what we're doing, but we have the leeway to kind of decide what our deliverables are going to be. For me, it turned out to be like an academic paper and then a booklet of the key findings, important information we thought that if this was the only thing that we could deliver to somebody, like the hospitals and the local health clinic, what would it be? And so we put that together, and it was about a 12-pager of just some of the key findings we had. So, but I'd venture to say that everybody here had a different type of deliverable, so.
No, I had my deliverables were I had about 4 or 5, but they were fairly small, so I did them over the course of the time that I was there. And I achieved most of the things, or I think all of the things that I did. But we do write, when we come back, I think about a month after we come back in September, we have to write a paper that includes a fair bit of reflection on our experience, both professionally and personally. So,
Any other?
Yeah, my deliverable was not an academic paper. It was multiple small, so it was a timeline was one, it was different info sheets, so focusing on water in Bangladesh or disaster relief, things that they could use in the future. They also have Habitat has a lot of volunteer events, so giving them ways, examples of tweets or finding ways that Habitat already shares this and just sharing that information with Bangladesh is my main deliverable.
And my main deliverable was a handbook that tried to educate the citizens of Nairobi and Kenya on their civic awareness, trying to raise their civic awareness and engaging them on what their political rights were to become more involved, to really do a better job of exercising their sovereign right as citizens to make decisions with the government. What that handbook was a 6-part book that really went over the history of those rights, that discussed what those rights are currently, and also different methods and the difficulties that they may face in order, and whenever they may practice, or if they choose to practice those rights.
And if I could just add, these deliverables do vary tremendously, and sometimes they're unexpected. We had one student who went to South Africa to work at a school that was connected, who served migrant populations. And she went there thinking she was going to develop a curriculum that would help them make the transition from, about 6th grade into a work life. And when she got there, the school had lost its funding, and it was closing. And so she basically took the task of helping to close that school. So it was really she didn't know this was going to happen until about 4 weeks into her project, so she was really deeply committed to the mission of the school and to the work that they were doing and to the children. And then to have to take this on of helping that school close in a way that other partners would take up parts of their work, I thought was just unexpected, but really an opportunity that she handled very well. Another student, one of their deliverables was creating a hand washing system that would be sustainable. Other students were very involved in empowering young women to feel comfortable asking for the things they needed to keep themselves safe. So some things were very concrete, some of the deliverables were very concrete, some were academic, and some were in many ways advocacy. So there was a real difference across the whole class, really a richness of experiences, different kinds of experiences. Any other questions? Good? Yes.
I have like 5, but I'm going to try and prioritize just one. I'm Shannon, and so I was wondering, it sounded like in sort of the development of your projects and your proposals, how much communication did you have, or understanding did you have of like that community and its needs before determining what you were going to deliver as a project or an initiative?
So a lot of the communication that I had with the project itself dealt specifically with the organization. There wasn't a lot of going out, hosting focus groups, or really gauging exactly how the community would respond to the project. I feel as if the organization sort of already taken the liberty of doing that, just really knowing, okay, so we've gotten information on this, we've gotten research on this. This is the deliverable that we want you to work on. And so I feel as if that was kind of already done in case. Now again, we did reach out to different organizations, different human rights groups, different leaders to kind of get a sense of how can we really better the project itself, but a lot of that work, really working with the community itself, and I feel like it had already been done before I even arrived at Nairobi.
Habitat is engaged in, I think, 8 different areas of Bangladesh, and so they have projects that are different program specific, but I was trying to get them to ask questions that they either hadn't asked before or in a different direction. So we're still trying to work on getting that information from them. We knew there were needs, we knew there were people that didn't have land ownership or that was disaster relief, those kind of issues. And so, but trying to figure out how the community goes about that and what other organizations are already there is something that Habitat's working on. And that was one of the recommendations, to build a coalition and really talk to the organizations that are already there, because there's a lot of aid already happening there, and Habitat's not the biggest organization in Bangladesh by far. So trying to figure out how they can work was my main project.
My situation was very similar to Julian's. My organization, since it was so new, what it really needed was to build its organizational capacity. So in terms of their target audience, our target audiences are legislators, and they went in March and April before I arrived, and went around and talked to all of the political parties in Aceh. But a lot of my work, I attended some meetings with legislators, but most of them didn't speak English. So a lot of my work was just helping the organization build itself up.
So the organization Piecework that I talked about earlier, which is really kind of the connecting piece for the university that I work with, the College of Rural Development. Jesse traveled there several times, gathering information, meeting with the staff, and then other people in the area that this project would involve. And so, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the stuff prior to going was already pretty much well laid out for me. I had the opportunity to kind of get in there and think that my project wasn't going to change. It did a little bit. About week 5, I had a student from Hendrix, an undergraduate, that would come in and assist me with some of the work. And 5 weeks in, we kind of found some missing pieces to the information in the project we set up. We came in with some preconceived notions, these thoughts about the community and what they were doing related to health, or maybe they didn't care, and really found out that it wasn't so much that they didn't care about their health, it was access and timing and things like that. And so that made us kind of reevaluate some of the questions we had asked and some of the work that we were doing. So towards the second 5 weeks of my project, some of that shifted, and we changed the focus a little bit. While we still looked at the infrastructure, we really started to look more at the public perception and what the households were really thinking, more or less, about their health instead of just the health facilities that are being provided.
This year we had an experiment that I think worked very well. We had 2 students from Hendrix and 1 student from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville who joined our students. What our objective was to provide an opportunity for undergraduates to be able to work abroad, to do substantial work abroad, but have it be a little less scary because they're with a graduate student, and our students mentored these undergraduates. And I think that it worked really well. Brandon can talk about that, but from my experience visiting them in Uganda, they were really amazing and added a lot to our team. So I think we're going to continue on and provide this opportunity for undergraduates, and it also provides an opportunity for our students to share their knowledge, their total confidence as they're in the field, and just to have another colleague there to think about the challenges that they face in both their work and personal environment. Other questions or comments? Great. Oh, one more?
Hi, I'm Jessie Rice. I represent Piecework and work very closely with the International Programs Office here. In my experiences, well, you all have traveled to cultures with such different personalities and values than our own culture. And whenever I am able to travel, my own value system kind of opens up, and I'm able to examine it, and I learn a lot by comparing those values to those that I'm experiencing in my destination country. So I wonder if any of you had that opportunity and what you learned about yourself.
So I had a really interesting experience. Well, Ramadan was interesting during the month, but then at the end of Ramadan, it's a week-long, or actually a month-long celebration because it starts a new month. But during this 1 week, right after Ramadan ends, the custom is to bake a bunch of cookies and set them out on your coffee table and then open your house and have strangers just come in, and we visited several other houses. And so experiencing that, because I kept thinking I would never allow a stranger in my house, experiencing that really kind of showed me how different the social fabric of the communities there are, and how different that would be in the U.S.
I also visited a country that was predominantly Muslim, but Habitat as an organization has a diversity of religions. And so on the work week was Sunday through Thursday there, and on Sundays we would have somebody from the office always talk about, normally a different value. So it was, kindness, trust, also sometimes Ramadan, when Ramadan was going on. So that, just how it could work and so easily in the organization, but also in the country, there's a lot of diversity. And this was my first experience being in a country like this. And I always felt very welcome, always felt very comfortable. And people were always open to asking questions and explaining anything and everything. So it was really eye-opening and reassuring experience.
The most valuable experience that Kenya, or Nairobi specifically, provided for me is that being there, just walking on the streets or just looking at billboards or just sitting at home and just watching TV, and you see people who look just like you, and I mean everywhere. You don't see that, very often. Being a black student here in America, I don't see that. And so being able to experience that for the first time was a very valuable, very enriching experience for me, something that I was very thankful for, something that I really, truly enjoyed.
I would just say, going from Arkansas, it's in the south, and transplanting to Vietnam in the south, the southern hospitality is all over the place. Like, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in the south somewhere, people are going to be love and warming and kind. And it kind of goes to, strangers opening up their homes. When we did the interviews and sat down with households, I got tired of eating food and, people offering gifts. I mean, it was great. Not that I was tired, just full. But people were just welcoming of me. And surprisingly, first meeting them, they thought I was Vietnamese, which I thought was crazy until I couldn't speak Vietnamese. And then they were like, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking to us? And so, but people got a kick out of that. But I mean, overall, it was just tremendous. I mean, I also got to work with families that were considered like well off in the area versus the poor, and looking at the difference in the things they had, and seeing that the lifestyle for some of them wasn't too different. It's just a matter of how consistently they can bring in an income that guarantees that, the security that we have here. So maybe you're a poor household, you've got dirt floors and a roof that's, made out of limbs, and your neighbor has, tile flooring, nice things in the house, but they're doing the same work. They're both farming, whether it's agriculture or animals, and it's just to see that the difference is really, can they bring in income consistently to meet their standard of living? And it's just really eye-opening to see that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming, for your thoughtful questions and comments, and thank you, panel, for sharing your experiences.